recommend it for anyone who is interested in learning more about big data, as well as Bill's other books. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to enter those into the chat, and we'll get going from there. So why don't we just jump right into it, and I'll start with my first question. So Bill, the idea of big data is a bit of a nebulous concept that means different things to different people, depending on your industry or academic perspective. I think most in the field really understand that Google, Facebook, and Amazon capture individualized data on consumers, including biographical data, search habits, content viewing habits, purchase and transactional behavior. The healthcare industry captures data on patients with the goal of improving outcomes and lowering costs. Insurance providers capture data on their insured in an effort to mitigate risk and allocate costs to the high-risk insured. Manufacturing, logistics, and transportation capture data on production, productivity, throughput, error, supply chains, and metrics of all sorts are captured on a variety of systems and platforms that may or may not share communications. So tell me, what do you consider, what is meant by the term big data, and why is big data now being characterized as the new oil?
So Casey, good question. There's you're right. The term big data is confusing because it makes organizations contemplate whether their data is quote unquote big enough. And actually, the bigger question is your problem big enough, right? Is the problem you're going after a big enough problem where applying data and analytics could have a material impact on it? The other thing about big data, and you alluded to this, Casey, is it isn't the volume of data that makes big data interesting. It's the granularity, right? It's that getting down to that individual student or customer or nurse or technician, that individual device, the compressor, the jet engine, whatever it might be. It's getting to that level of granularity where things get very interesting, right? We have a chance to leverage this granular individualized data to apply analytics to that, to create and uncover propensities, insights buried in the data. Which customers are likely to leave, which ones are most susceptible to a cross-sell opportunity, which products or components are likely to break, and when they're likely to break, and what's going to cause those to break. So it's, when we talk about big data, it does kind of clutter the fact, but the two things that are critical here is, number one, it's not about the bigness of the data, it's about the bigness of the problem. And number two, it's not the volume that you're going to monetize. It's that granularity, that individualized granularity that provides the insights around which you can drive optimized decisions.
Oh, perfect. So, well, let me tell you. What are some of the key challenges then an organization faces in understanding what data assets they have, the system where the data resides, and how data is structured across these systems in a way that may not allow them to share? Essentially, how do we find where the pockets of oil are within the organization?
The biggest challenge, Casey, is basically alignment between IT and the business. Every organization's got data. I'll tell you right now that every organization out there has got data, and there are valuable insights. They have these sources of oil, right? And inside this data, there are insights about their customers, their products, their operations. The biggest challenge is to figure out, by collaborating with the business, what insights in that data is most valuable, right? How do you distinguish signal from noise in the data? Data is, very voluminous, but there are much like there's a gold, a line of gold in there, right? There's gold in there, but you've got to know the problem you're trying to solve so you can figure out what data to apply against that. So the biggest challenge organizations face almost has nothing to do with technology. It has everything to do with organizational alignment and a executive commitment that they are going to take the results of the data analysis, the insights about their customers, products, and their operations, and are actually going to apply it to the business. I mean, you can have a data science team do all the greatest work in the world, come up with all these great insights about your customers and your products, but if no one's going to act on them, who gives a hoot, right? It doesn't matter. So It's that alignment up front that drives a success. And when you have that alignment and you understand clearly the problem you're trying to solve, everything else falls in place. You know what data is important. You know what data is not important. You know what analytics are important. You know what analytics aren't important. And so it really puts a scope around that problem that you really can then focus to drive value.
So you're really focusing on a problem-solving perspective in terms of building your analytics platform. So, are there hidden values within additional data points throughout the operations of the enterprise? So would an enterprise be better off building a large data lake, collecting as many data points as available within their system, data capture systems, enhanced data capture systems to gather more data? Should they be focusing only on those data points that are really driving their KPIs or that particular problem?
So I believe that organizations, you're going to want a data lake, but how you build that data lake is really critical. Dumping 25 data sources into a data lake, opening the doors and saying, here, business users, have at it, go get value. The only thing you're going to get from that is crickets, right? Because they're not going to know where and how to start. So what I see work the best is a use case by use case approach for building up your data lake. You may not need 25 data sources in your data lake to start off with. Maybe you need 3, right? Maybe those are the 3 required to solve the organization's business problem they want to go after. Then when you target your second use case, you can then reuse the data that's in that data lake, and maybe you got to add 1 or 2 more sources. But the beauty is the data sets that are already in the data lake, if you put them in there in a curated fashion, if you really put them in there in a governed fashion, those data sets are now available to use across an unlimited number of use cases at a marginal cost equal to 0. So this use case by use case approach to build out your data lake is the one that drives the most value for an organization. It puts the most data to work at the right time, and it avoids the fallacy of a data lake where people put all this data in a data lake. And when you put data into a data lake, it costs you money, right? You got to store it, you got to maintain it, you got to secure it, you got to back it up. If you're not going to use that data, then don't put it in there.
Got it. So there's been a lot of talk about the use of artificial intelligence, right? Analytics is really kind of, the data and the data lake itself is great, but until you've got analytics that drive that to get you solutions to your problem, really, there's no asset value there. So in terms of finding those analytical tools, there's a lot of talk today about artificial intelligence in a large number of applications. What are some of the current trends, and what is important what's the importance of utilizing AI to maximize the value of big data currently?
So AI is a slippery term, because there really is not a single AI utility or algorithm, right? There's AI can be thought of as a family of different capabilities. So supervised and unsupervised machine learning, there's neural networks and reinforcement learning, there's all kinds of different things out there. And so instead of thinking about AI as being a hammer, think about AI as being a toolkit that's got a bunch of different tools in it. And each of these tools are best used in certain purposes, much like a carpenter. It doesn't use a hammer to solve all their problems. They got saws, they got chisels, they have screwdrivers, right? They have all the right tools. And so the first thing to think about is I've got this range of advanced analytic tools that I can use. What are the right tools to use in the right situation? Now, here's where it gets interesting, right? You need to understand the situation you're going after before you know what tool you should use. Should I use a deep learning algorithm? Should I use a supervised machine learning algorithm? Or should I use an unsupervised, right? So understanding and having clarification on the problem you're trying to solve will help the data science team understand what tools they're going to want to use to solve that problem. Otherwise, you just kind of, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. So there's a lot of pre-work that you want to do up front. And that pre-work, by the way, is a tight collaboration between the data science team, the data management team, and the business stakeholders. to make sure you clearly understand the problem you're going to go after. You understand the metrics and KPIs against which you're going to measure success and progress. You understand the stakeholders who are impacted by it. I mean, I can go on to all the items that are required here, but there's a lot of pre-work that has to happen before you ever put science to the data.
Very cool. So, let me ask you then, in your most recent book, you talk about analytical architecture model. Can you discuss that a little bit and discuss, how open source AI platforms are being used to help in that model?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about what I call an analytic module architecture, which is, I'll just back up a second. So one of the biggest fallacies in our industry is that there is value in having a machine learning model or an AI model, right? It's having a plethora of one-off orphaned analytic applications doesn't help anybody. And it's actually been perpetrated by some pretty large advisory firms who want to know, well, how many ML models do you have? Well, who gives a hoot, right? It isn't how many you have, it's how many are you actively being able to use and reuse over again. So what's in the book is an architecture about not how to build these analytic modules. And I think about analytic modules, I think about analytic modules that are reusable, supportable, composable, and are continuously learning and adapting, right? I don't want to have 1,000 analytic modules. I want to have a handful that are basically being used over and over again across a wide range of problems. And so what's laid out in the book is what the architecture looks like for that. And there is a plethora of open source tools inside there. I mean, we're blessed today with this great bounty of open source tools because a lot of the big vendors out there, they're taking some of their best tools and they're making them open source. So like, for example, Google and TensorFlow, there's a marvelous AI machine learning, framework right there that they've open sourced. I mean, you'd be a fool to build your own. I'm going to use the one they got. And so, but the book talks about the necessity of building this architected framework that supports the ability to reuse these analytic modules across a wide range of use cases. Because the more that you can use those analytic modules across those use cases, not only do they accelerate time to value and de-risk projects, so you're reusing these things over, but if you architect them and engineer them correctly, you can actually build them using tools so they're continuously learning and adapting to the environment around them.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. So we also discuss in the book this idea, economics, established economic concepts around marginal cost and marginal revenue. Can you kind of briefly explain those concepts and how they apply to essentially this value proposition that you're describing?
Yeah, there's the part of the challenge, I think, why data today still does not get the level of respect it deserves from senior management is because we don't think about data and analytics from an economics perspective. Let me give you an example. We know that a data set properly curated, right, and put in place, that data set, that same single data set can be used, that data never wears out, that data set never depletes, and that same data set can be used across an infinite number of use cases at a near zero marginal cost. Right? We don't have any other asset in our companies that looks like that. I can reuse the same asset over and over again. It doesn't cost me anything. I pay for the cost of generating that data and put it into my data lake once, and now it's available for every use case any customer, any user can think of to use freely. I mean, that's free money. But again, this idea that data to reuse it has a zero marginal cost is a game changer because it allows you to think about data as this asset. Data is not the new oil. Data is the new sun because it never wears out. And so when you start thinking about the marginal benefit versus the marginal cost, if the marginal cost is constant, and every time you add a new use case, you're adding more and more value, you can see how organizations really turn this into literally the data lake becomes a printing press. You are printing money.
Makes it very interesting from an accounting perspective in terms of how you put that on the books, because most of these hard assets are really part of goodwill or they are depreciating, capitalized over time. And now you've got a construct that really is not congruent with a lot of the traditional GAAP processes.
So Casey, this is a good example of I've been in this industry for like 40 some years. Like I got started when I was 10, right? So I've been in this industry a long time. And the thing that I've always sort of my challenge has always been, how do you determine the value of data? And so I've always took this on in the data warehouse BI space, then moving into the data science, AI space. And the challenge for me was always framed by this idea that I should be able to put data on my balance sheet, right? I should be able to reflect it on a balance sheet, and it should reflect into the value of a company, right? We did this research project at the University of San Francisco about 3 years ago, where I had, you mentioned I'm an executive fellow there, so I had access to a number of very brilliant, motivated, hardworking, and free research resources. And I said, I want you to go out there and find me an asset that behaves like data so that I can have a proxy for how I'm going to put that into a balance sheet. So they go off and they do all their great research and stuff. And one of the researchers, she comes back to me, she says, Professor Schmarzo, says, I got a problem. I said, she said, I'm really hung up here. She said, I can't find anything on the balance sheet from an accounting perspective that looks like data. She says, think about it. Data never wears out, right? There's no depreciation. The data never depletes, right? There's no depletion tables. And that same data set can be used across an infinite number of use cases at zero marginal cost. When she said that zero marginal cost, I realized that the challenge I had been facing, the problem was me. I kept thinking about it from an accounting perspective. I was so desperate to put this on the balance sheet. And it's not an accounting conversation. It's not a value in exchange conversation, because accounting determines the value of an asset by what someone's willing to pay for it. No. This is a value in use conversation. This is an economics conversation. If you go back to Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, 1776, he talks about value, how to determine value. He talks about accounting, right? Value in exchange, but he also talks about economics, this value and use concept. So when I realized that my mindset had been wrong, when I could take out and unlearn what I thought was the gospel and reframe this, it all became, the light bulb exploded in my head. It's like, oh my gosh, this becomes such a no-brainer. Now, getting people to make that transition is hard. I mean, it was hard for me. It took a moment of somebody basically saying, Schmarzo, you're thinking about this all wrong. And so when you make that shift from an accounting mind frame and putting things on a balance sheet, it's kind of a bit of an artificial thing. My accounting friends are probably going to yell at me and stuff. But the real challenge here is it isn't the possession of data that's valuable. It's not owning it that's valuable. It's how you use it. And that makes that an economics conversation.
Well, that's very interesting, framing it that way. So you've motivated me to go to the 10Ks for Google and Facebook and see how they're booking all of those huge data lakes that, even folks like Bloomberg or some of these credit reporting agencies, that's where their primary assets are tied up in terms of where they generate revenue. So I'm going to go back and look at how these guys are doing that and try to better understand that.
Well, some companies like the Bloombergs, the AC Nielsen, they're in the selling of data business. It's for them, data is product. But for American Express, Fidelity, GE, Hitachi, right? All these companies out there, they're not in the business of selling data. They're in the business of using data to monetize it around their use cases. Those are the companies that are very interesting. Look at the Amazons and how they're not selling data, right? They're using data to help sell more products. They're trying to predict what products you're likely to buy next. They're trying to make sure that product you're going to buy is in a distribution center nearby so they can deliver it the same day.
It's pretty fascinating. So Kate, can you throw up Bill's slide, and really what I'd like to take the next few minutes, Bill, to talk about is kind of some of the process around monetizing organizational data. Really kind of describe at a high level. We only have a few minutes to really kind of walk through some of the key steps that are necessary to demonstrate to smaller and mid-sized companies, maybe companies 5 billion or below, where they have an opportunity to really look at their data and try to find ways to monetize that and create value for them.
Yeah, so there's a couple of slides that I torture my students with. These are slides where we'll literally spend an entire class session just on one slide. The Big Data Business Model Maturity Index is one. The Schmarzo Digital Economic Valuation Asset Valuation Theorem is one. This is one as well. And this is the heart, to me, of data monetization and creating value. And the reason why this is because I believe organizations need to master 4 skill sets in order to really drive data monetization. That there are 4 skill sets they got to do. Number 1, you have to be able to identify where the sources of value is created. Right? And the best tools for doing that, in my opinion, are a combination of design thinking tools, so customer journey maps and service design templates, but also economics. So you can kind of see in this little mock-up here that on a customer journey, and at a summary level, there's 5 stages, right? There's an epiphany moment when the customer realizes they're going to go on a journey, pre-execution, execution, post-execution, then the expiration or the afterglow. And along that journey, there are decisions that they're making and actions that they're taking that are high value. And then there are things that they have to deal with that actually impede value creation. And so what we want to do is we want to use a combination of the design thinking concepts blended with some economics to understand where are the points of value creation, because we want to highlight those, right? We really want to make sure that we're highlighting those. But we also want to identify those impediments to value creation, because they might also provide monetization opportunities. So, and we spent probably an hour just on that one line so that the students understand how important it is to walk in the shoes of your customers, different target customers, and understand their journey. Because at the end of the day, the only person that has ink in their pen, who's got the money, who's driving value, is the customer. So that's step 1. Very design thinking centric. It's outside in thinking. It's thinking about the customer first, not the product first. A lot of companies struggle, by the way, here, Casey. A lot of companies, they think inside out. They think about their products and they say, okay, I built this product. Who might want to buy it? No. This is about outside in. This is what my customers are trying to do. What products do I need? What services do I need to help them to achieve that? So that's step 1. Step 2, codifying it. You have to be able to codify the propensities and the tendencies and the inclinations, and we do this through data science, right? We have a data science methodology kind of laid out here to sort of show you what it is, but end of the day, we have to be able to codify where the value is being created, because if we don't codify it, then we can't scale it, we can't operationalize it. So 2 and 3 are very tightly linked together. So if I'm going to build, I want to understand which customers are likely to attrite. Now that I want to build a model that tells me which customers are likely to attrite, and by the way, I'll probably have a customer lifetime value prediction to go along with it, because not all customers are equal value. Once I've done that, then I need to operationalize that into my operational systems so that I have the systems in place. They're doing the right execution to make sure that customer doesn't attract. So maybe it's in customer service, maybe it's in marketing, maybe it's my sales group, right? So that steps 2 and 3, codifying and operationalize them, are really critical. Number 4 is the gotcha, though. You can do 1, 2, and 3 really well, but you won't dominate a market until you build a culture around continuously learning and adapting. Now, you do this from 2 perspectives. You can certainly use AI, right? Machine learning, deep learning, machine reinforcement learning, things like that, to build analytic assets, analytic modules, and analytic profiles that are continuously learning and adapting. You can do that from the technology perspective. We see it today with autonomous vehicles, right? We know how to do that. But here's the gotcha. You also have to create empowered teams at the front line who are also continuously learning and adapting in combination with the technology. There's a concept called active learning that's used in the AI world, where machine does some things, but machines can't, the machine learning models can't do it all. They rely on humans to help them understand and tag certain situations. And so building that, both a technology infrastructure and an employee frontline culture of continuous learning and adapting, is the point of transformation. Because then what's happening is you are winning the most important game in the knowledge-based industry. And that game is around my ability to learn faster and adapt faster than my competition. Because like we talked previously, right? I believe the economies of learning are much more powerful than economies of scale. You can't build moats anymore and hope to keep the competition out. This is a sprint, folks, and you have to learn and adapt faster than your competition. Otherwise, they're going to run right by you.
Those are all fascinating, and obviously there's a lot more detail in your book, and you go into, some additional steps that really help explain, the detail behind each of these concepts. And I recommend that reading. But you mentioned, giving the frontline people that ability. A lot of organizational culture and tone at the top are critical to executing and achieving any initiative within an organization. So what kind of organizational leadership structure is necessary to really realize the full value of organizational data?
The biggest challenge I think organizations face in this conversation isn't building the analytics, isn't building the analytic assets or even the analytic modules in the right way. We know how to do that. The biggest challenge is, how do you empower your frontline employees, the people who are either talking and working with your customers or managing the operations of the business? There's almost a complete reversal of how an organizational structure thinks. I used to work at a company called Sequent Computers, and I loved our org chart because the org chart always had the customer at the top. It was an inverted org chart, right? It was upside down. Customer at the top, and then the inverted org chart, and the very bottom was our CEO. And the CEO, Casey Powell, felt that his job was to knock out the impediments that hinder his frontline employees from providing value. That's the right kind of culture. We have to empower the front line so that everybody is being maximized, right? There is greatness in everyone, but yet we build organizational structures around boxes that does everything it's possible to not let that greatness come out. And that's the challenge here, Casey, is how do you build an organization that can be complemented by AI, that helps to build this continuous learning by empowered teams at the front line of customer engagement and operations?
So in some of our previous conversations, there was discussion of chief data monetization officers. So tell me a little bit about your ideas on the interplay between that high-level monetization officer and these frontline guys who are actually the rubber where the road meets.
Yeah, exactly. So I think organizations, the reason why I think most organizations suck at monetizing data is that no one in the company wakes up in the morning, goes to bed at night, and in those time that they're awake, thinks and worries and brainstorms about how do I get more value out of my data. The chief data monetization officer is kind of a unique character, kind of a unique cat, because they have to have a really appreciation of how analytics work so that they can help figure out how to marry the data, the analytics with the use case they're going after. So they have to have a process around engaging with the business, engaging with the data science team. But they've also got to have almost an HR kind of component around empowerment. The AI models, the AI models will only learn based on what data they have. They don't learn beyond the data they have. And so this is where the power of humans come in. And a human can come in, and here's a great example. You have an AI model. It's deciding who gets loans and who doesn't get loans, right? And it decides this person comes in, looks at their payment history, their track record, and says, does not qualify. Then a human gets involved and talks to this person. This person says, yeah, I've had a hard life, but I've recently come out. I want to buy a car. I want to use this money to buy a car because I want to become an Uber driver. Now, wait a second. The old model rejected them, but maybe the human says, wait a second. Maybe we're missing something here. I'm going to go ahead and approve that loan. We're going to measure how effective it was. And if it works, then our model gets better. And so this idea of the human machine interplay, we're not trying to factor people out. We're trying to make humans more human by using AI so they can use that innate greatness inside them to help make the right decision at the point of customer or operational engagement.
Yeah, there are additional tools in the toolbox. Well, so Bill, let me ask you, we want to save a little bit of time to open up for questions, but, do you see a role for, outside consultancies in those organizations that don't necessarily have a clear understanding, or the internal data scientist or really systems in place to exploit the values of the data lakes within organizations, or for those guys who really want to kind of test the waters but don't want to spend huge inordinate amounts of cash, how do they start to proceed on this?
So I'm a firm believer, because I've seen this work time in and time out, that an iterative approach to build out your data and analytics capabilities is the right approach. The big bang approach, or how we built ERP systems, you spent $20-30 million, you spent 2 or 3x that on services. It took you 5 years, and you hope something of value is squirted out at the end, right? Those days are dead, right? Because of the cloud, because of open source tools, because of things like Kubernetes and such. We have the ability to do these things more iteratively. And by the way, when we do things iteratively, we can employ this economies of learning. Whatever we learn in our first use case, we now can apply to the second one, can apply to the third one. And so the idea that it's going to cost you $10 million, $5 million to do that first use case is BS. In fact, that's exactly the wrong way to look at it, right? I see these certain kinds of organizations come in, and they want you to spend $15-20 million, and they give you this really great strategy, and it's leather bound and it's going to sit on your bookshelf, but it doesn't tell you what you're going to do. It doesn't have any instructions. It doesn't have a guide for how you do this iteratively, where each use case pays for itself. It's like printing money. So I think organizations who want to get into this, there is an opportunity for consulting organizations who want to take this more agile approach, that they're going to go use case by use case. Now, the challenge for the consulting company is that you are forced to prove yourself each use case, right? Each use case, you got to prove yourself time and time again. But I tell you what, I've been in this game. I've done this with a lot of customers, and I'll take that challenge any day, because it is, when you focus on the right things up front, when you set this up, I like to say, how do I ensure that my data science team wins? Well, I cheat, right? I cheat. I do all this pre-work ahead of time. I make sure that there's a businesses lined up. Make sure the business problem we're going after has value to it. I make sure we have the right data to go after it. Before I attack a problem, I cheat. And that's why I know I'm going to be successful. And once I do that first one, the challenge then becomes not finding the second one. The challenge becomes the avalanche of opportunities. Organizations don't fail because of lack of use cases. They fail because they have too many. So once you have that first one, once you sort of cracked open the code, you got this big rush, which, by the way, is another place where I see consultancies can have a big impact, is putting in place a governance structure to make sure you have the right prioritization, that you are focused on reusing your data and analytic assets over and over again. Again, if you reuse the data analytics assets over and over again on a use case by use case basis, you reduce the time to value and you de-risk the project. It's like printing money.
Well, great way to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we are running low on time, Bill, and I do want to take a couple of minutes. We're not going to have time to actually address questions that were posed. We ran a little long and need to wrap up, but we will respond to any questions that you may have submitted to the chat, or you can submit any additional questions via email. And we will respond to those. So in closing, that's all the time we do have for today's session. If we were not able to respond, we'll make sure and get those responses out via email. I want to thank Bill for today's discussion. Again, his new books is The Economics of Data Analytics and Data Transformation, which can be found on Amazon. We want to thank each of you for joining today and invite you to join us again next month as we continue to explore topics in big data, AI, automation, IoT with Bill. We plan on doing a series of these, and we look forward to having you join us for those. Again, today's webinar is presented by the San Diego Consulting Group, which is a full-time business consulting service provider with practice groups specializing in digital transformation and automation, revenue enrichment, marketing and messaging, and supply chain and operational efficiencies. We enable our clients to surpass their goals by implementing unique custom strategies that deliver tangible and measurable results. So I want to thank you all again and have a great day.